She found the first cub, with its ribs showing through wet fur, half drowned in a runoff ditch 3 miles from the massacre site, and by the time she had counted all 5 of them alive in her arms, Eitain Brennack understood that whoever had slaughtered an entire warband in the ash grove had left 5 heirs breathing in the mud without knowing it. If you are watching this from a place where the nights get that kind of cold, the kind that gets into your teeth, comment below so I know you understand exactly what she was walking into. And if a story about a girl who raises what she does not understand and loves what she is forbidden to keep is the kind of thing that keeps you up past midnight, like this video now, and subscribe before the first loop closes, because you will want to be here when it does. 3 things did not add up that night, and Eitain, trained since age 7 to notice what did not add up, filed each one away with the cold patience her dead guardian had beaten into her. First, 5 wolf pups, born within days of each other by the softness of their milk teeth, found together in a slaughter, aimed, by every mark of blade and burn, at killing, not birthing. Second, a war band of at least 30 men, professional by the uniformity of their boot prints, wiped out to the last body without a single pup touched, not eaten, not crushed, not bruised, as if someone with inhuman restraint had carried them clear before the killing finished. Third, the one that kept her awake with her knife across her knees for 11 straight nights, a low, rhythmic, enormous sound, moving through the tree line every dusk since, never approaching, never leaving, circling the cabin like something guarding a door it had no right to open. That was Loop A, and it would not close for a long time yet. Eitain was 24 years old, and had been raised to kill quietly by a man who was not her father in any way the law would recognize. Cadwallader Ossory had been steward and blade master to a minor lordship on the western border of Dubrath territory, and Eitain was the daughter he had gotten on a serving girl he never married, a fact the lord's household made sure she understood every day of her childhood through the particular cruelty reserved for children who exist as evidence of someone else's shame. Cadwallader trained her in secret, in the hours before dawn, because he said a girl with no name and no claim needed a skill no one could take from her, and by 16 she could put a throwing knife through a man's throat from across a courtyard without her hands shaking. When Cadwallader died of an ordinary fever, the household did not wait a season before casting her out. She took nothing with her but 3 knives, a cloak, and the stillness of someone who had already survived the worst thing she expected life to do to her. She built the cabin herself, in a hollow of the ash grove no patrol bothered to walk, and for 2 years lived exactly the life she wanted, unwitnessed, unowned, answerable to no one. Then the massacre happened 400 yards from her door, and 5 pups needed feeding, and that life stopped being the only consideration. She fed them goat's milk through a strip of cloth twisted into a teat, one at a time, through nights that blurred together. She named them, because a thing you feed at 3 in the morning earns a name whether you meant to give one or not. Brogon, for the biggest and boldest, Sod for the smallest and most stubborn, 3 more from half-remembered songs her mother used to hum. She noticed, without examining it too closely, that they grew faster than any wolf pup had a right to, their eyes holding something too aware, too old, for creatures 11 days out of the den. She filed it, the way Cadwallader had taught her, and kept feeding them anyway. By the 3rd week, she'd have put her own knife through anyone who tried to take them. The circling presence in the tree line came closer on the 12th night. Eitain heard it break a branch it had no reason to break, unless it wanted her to hear, unless it was, in whatever way a beast could manage such a thing, asking. She found him on the 13th night, when the sound stopped moving and started screaming. He was collapsed in the mouth of an old badger den half a mile from her cabin, and Eitain's first read of him, made in the half-second before deciding whether to put a knife in his throat, was that he was dying the worst way a creature could die, caught between forms, spine arched wrong, one shoulder a man's and the other a wrong angle of black fur and tendon, jaw flickering between speech and bite, chest heaving with a sound too deep for a man and too broken for a wolf. Silver-black hair, soaked dark with sweat and old blood, fell across a face that even mid-transformation carried an unmistakable weight of command, the kind that had never once needed to ask for anything twice. His eyes, finding her in the dark, went through 3 colors in a breath: amber, then a black so complete it swallowed the amber, then back. He did not attack her. He should have. A creature in the grip of a cursed transformation had no reliable self left to appeal to, but the half-formed hand nearest her reached, shaking, toward her cabin, and made a sound that was almost a word. Etain had killed 12 men in her life and never hesitated over one. She hesitated now, exactly as long as it took to realize the shape of the sound he was making. "Pups," he was trying to say. "My pups." That was Loop B beginning, though she did not know it yet. The pups she had raised for 2 months in the belief that she alone had saved them belonged, by blood she could not yet read, to the ruined creature bleeding out in front of her. She did not tell him she had them, not that night. That night, she did the only thing Cadwallader had ever taught her that applied to a dying stranger. She made a decision fast, and lived with the consequences slow. She dragged 200 pounds of half-shifted stranger back to her cabin on a hide sledge meant for deer, packed the worst of his wounds with yarrow and spider silk, and sat through 3 days of fever, during which he said maybe 40 words total, none of them useful, all of them in a voice that made the pups, when they finally caught his scent through the cabin wall, lose their minds with a joy so total that Etain understood, with the particular dread of someone watching a fact arrive she cannot unknow, exactly who he was to them before he ever said his name. He said it on the 4th morning, lucid for the first time. His body finally settled into the fully human shape of a man, built like something meant to be looked up at. Broad through the shoulder in a way that made her small cabin feel smaller, forearms scarred in the specific geometric pattern of someone who had trained with a blade since before he could walk, and eyes that in full daylight, in full clarity, resolved into a color she had no name for. Gold shot through with a deep, banked red, like embers under ash, that darkened toward black whenever he looked at the pile of sleeping pups in the corner. "Cormac," he said, "Cormac Dubrith. And you are the reason 5 heirs of a kingdom are alive to hear their father's voice. So before anything else, understand I intend to spend the rest of my life repaying a debt I don't think can be repaid." Etain did not soften at titles. She'd grown up in a household that used them as a leash. "You're the Alpha King," she said, flat, already recalculating every risk in the room. "I am the Alpha King who let 30 of his own guard die and his own children scatter into the mud because I trusted the wrong man with the map of my own hunting grounds," Cormac said, and the exact, surgical shame in it, no self-pity, just an audit of his own failure, was the first thing about him that made Etain's careful distance crack, just enough to keep her listening. He told her what he knew, which was less than either wanted. A warband had ambushed his personal guard on what should have been an unremarkable border patrol, timed to a night he'd brought all 5 pups with him, a rare indulgence, meant to let them run free territory before the formal presentation announcing them as heirs. The attack was too precise to be any rival house he could name. Someone inside Dubrath had drawn the map, chosen the night, and in the chaos, guard dying around him, a curse-forged blade, smithed specifically to trap a wolf-kind between shapes, outlawed for 300 years. Opening his side, Cormac had done the only thing left. Shifted his pups into wolf form early, on pure desperate instinct, scattering them into the dark to save their lives at the cost of losing all trace of where they'd gone. "Whoever forged that blade," Etain said slowly, turning the word over, "had it made for exactly this. For you. For that night." "Yes," Cormac said, and the ember gold of his eyes went very still. "Which means, whoever did this knew my patrol route, my pup schedule, and had 300 years of outlawed pack law violated on their behalf, and none of that happens without someone inside my own hall." That was Loop C's first plant, quiet and easy to miss. Somewhere in Cormac's own court sat a traitor with the resources to commission a forbidden weapon, and neither Etain nor Cormac yet knew who. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Etain's life. Cormac would not leave, could not, in good conscience, drag 5 pups too young to fully shift back across dangerous territory with a traitor still unidentified in his own hall. And so the cabin in the ash grove became something Etain had never once let herself imagine. A home, with more than one heartbeat in it, that she chose to keep. Cormac hunted for both of them, badly at first, and Etain caught herself laughing, an unfamiliar sound in her own throat, the first time he came back from a hunt with nothing but a torn cloak and the wounded dignity of a king who had just lost a fight to a particularly clever badger. He watched her with the pups and said little for a long time, and when he finally spoke about it, it was with the careful honesty of a man unused to admitting weakness. "You handled Sadib's fever better than any healer in my hall would have." "Where did you learn that?" "Nowhere," Etain said, which was not quite true, and Cormac, who had spent 30 years reading lies off the faces of courtiers paid to be good at telling them, heard the gap in it and did not push. He had learned that Etain's silences were not evasions so much as walls built by someone never once given a reason to trust that honesty would be safe, and he found himself wanting, against every instinct court survival had trained into him, to be the first person who proved that instinct wrong. The moment his condescension cracked into something closer to reverence, came on the night 3 of Muirchertach's scouts found the cabin. Muirchertach, Cormac's regent uncle, ruling in the Pups' names during the search for their missing king, had sent search parties out under the cover of a rescue mission. Etain clocked the 3 men crossing the tree line 11 minutes before Cormac even caught their scent, and by the time he'd pulled himself upright to defend his family with a body that could barely hold a blade, she had already put 2 scouts down without a sound, and had the 3rd pinned with her knife at the joint of his jaw, extracting, in a voice gone utterly without inflection, exactly who had sent them and why. "You didn't tell me you could do that," Cormac said afterward, staring at her the way a man stares at a landscape he thought he'd already mapped and discovers has an entire hidden valley in it. "You didn't ask," Etain said, wiping her blade clean with the economical calm of someone who had done this 100 times before, and in that single unbothered gesture, Cormac Dubrath, Alpha King, Ardri of a kingdom that had spent 3 generations mistaking size for strength, understood with total clarity that the woman standing in his rescued children's nursery was not someone he had been protecting. She was someone who had been protecting him the entire time, and the shift in how he looked at her after that night never fully reversed. The scout, before he died of wounds Etain had not intended to be fatal, but pride and fear had made him fight past healing, gave up one true thing. Lord Muirchertach was not searching for Cormac to bring him home. Muirchertach was searching for Cormac to make certain he never arrived. That confirmed Loop C's shape without yet naming its final proof. The proof came from Sadba, the smallest, most stubborn pup, who had taken to dragging interesting objects back to the den, and who one gray morning dropped at Etain's feet a torn strip of cloak fabric snagged on bramble 1/2 mile toward the massacre site, still stained dark at one corner. Etain almost discarded it. Then she saw the seal worked into the clasp, still pinned to the fabric, a blacksmith's mark, 3 interlocking rings, one she recognized because Cadwallader had once made her memorize every registered smith's mark in 3 kingdoms, on the theory that a weapon's origin was often the fastest way to its owner's throat. "This mark," she said, holding it up to Cormac with a stillness that made him go quiet before she'd said another word, "belongs to a smith who was struck from the guild rolls 200 years ago for forging curse blades. His mark isn't supposed to exist on anything made in the last 2 centuries. It isn't supposed to exist at all." Cormac took the clasp from her with hands that had gone unsteady for the first time since his fever broke. "This mark," he said slowly, "is on the ceremonial dagger my uncle Muirchertach carries at every formal council. He told me it was a family heirloom. He told me it predated the ban." "It's newer than that," Etain said. "This metal hasn't had time to weather. Someone commissioned this within the last year. Someone with access to a smith who shouldn't exist anymore, forging a blade specifically designed to trap a wolf-kind between shapes. Timed to a night your uncle knew your patrol route because your uncle is the one who said it." The silence that followed was the silence of a man rebuilding, in the space of 10 seconds, 30 years of trust into 30 years of evidence he had simply refused to see. That was the moment Loop B and Loop C locked together. the man who had orchestrated the massacre that scattered 5 pups into the mud, who had sent scouts to finish what the massacre started, who had spent weeks ruling in the name of children he intended to be the last of their line, was the same man currently holding Dubrath's throne in trust and calling it loyalty. We're about a third of the way through what's coming, and I promise you the worst of what Murchertach has planned hasn't even started yet. So if you want to see exactly how far a man will go to keep a crown that was never his, stay through to the end, because the arena scene coming up is not going to go the way you expect. They had, Cormac said, exactly one option that would not get all 6 of them killed before the truth could be proven. Return to Dubrath's seat under the cover of a hunting party, present the pups alive before the full assembled pack at the earliest lawful gathering, and force Murchertach's hand in front of witnesses he could not silence. A quiet accusation in a private hall would get them all dead within a night. A public one, before the pack's ancient law of open challenge, was the only ground on which a regent's manufactured authority could be broken by evidence instead of by force alone. You understand, Cormac said, the night before they left the ash grove, that once we walk into that hall, you stop being a woman who saved my children in secret and become a woman my entire court will scrutinize for weakness. They will look for a reason to say you don't belong beside a king. I've spent my whole life being looked at like I don't belong somewhere, Etain said. I know how to survive it. I'm not asking you to survive it, he said, something in his face settling into a certainty he no longer bothered hiding. I'm telling you anyone who tries to make you feel that way answers to me personally, in front of the entire pack, and I will not be gentle about it. It was not a declaration dressed in flowers. It was a king promising violence on her behalf, plainly, and it was, Etain thought, the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. The journey back took 4 days, the pups riding in a hide sling across Etain's back, through the stretches too dangerous to run free. Cormac scouting ahead in wolf form, healed enough now to hold a full shift without pain. They reached the outer wall on the evening of the 4th day, and Murchertach's steward, a thin, nervous man named Fintan, clearly posted at the gate to intercept any unexpected arrival, went the color of old ash at the sight of Cormac, alive and walking. "My lord," Fintan stammered, the search parties reported no trace. We feared the worst. Lord Murchertach has been ruling in my children's names for 2 months, Cormac said, mild as still water, while sending scouts to make certain I stayed lost. Send word to the council hall. Tell my uncle his king has come home to make a formal accusation under open challenge, and that I expect every seated elder present within the hour. Fintan's hands were shaking so badly he nearly dropped the ceremonial staff he carried, and Etain, watching him from 3 steps behind Cormac, with the pups pressed close around her ankles, filed that reaction away, exactly the way Cadwallader had trained her, to file anything that did not add up. Because an innocent steward, however frightened, does not shake like a man watching his own executioner walk through the gate. It took less than an hour for the fear to explain itself. Fintan, cornered in the stable yard by Etain alone, her knife not drawn but visible, broke in less time than it took to count to 20. He had carried messages. He swore he hadn't known what the blade was for, only that Lord Murchertach had paid him in silver to deliver sealed letters to a smith outside the guild rolls 3 times over the past year. The final letter, delivered 9 days before the massacre, specifying a patrol route and a date. "Write it down," Etain told him. "Everything. Every letter, every date, every payment. You do that, and you tell it to the assembled council with your own mouth in an hour, and I will personally make sure the king knows it was your confession that broke this open, before the blade could be found and buried, by someone paid better than you were." Fintan wrote it down with a hand that would not stop shaking, and that was Loop A's final closing, the mystery of the massacre's precision, the too perfect timing that had haunted Etain since the first cold night with 5 pups shivering against her chest, resolved into the plain, ugly shape of a steward, paid in silver, and a regent who had gambled a kingdom's bloodline on the theory that dead heirs tell no tales. The council hall filled within the hour exactly as Cormac had commanded, elders and war captains crowding the tiered stone benches beneath torchlight, and Murchertach entered last, robed in regent's gray, his face arranged into a relief so smooth it would have fooled anyone who hadn't spent 4 days assembling, piece by piece, the true architecture of his ambition. "Nephew," Murkertach said, arms spread wide, "the pack rejoices. We feared you lost beyond finding, and your heirs with you." "Save it," Cormac said, and the hall went utterly silent at the tone. "I invoke open challenge, before this full council, against Lord Murkertach Dubrath, regent of this seat, on the charge of conspiracy to murder the sovereign line of this pack." The uproar took nearly a full minute to quiet, and in that minute, Etain watched Murkertach's mask recalculate, cold and fast, pivoting from denial to a different strategy entirely. "On what evidence," he said, pitched to Carrie, "does my nephew accuse the man who has held this seat safe for him for 2 months, while he vanished into the wild with a stranger no one in this hall has ever seen? A line meant to turn every eye toward her, to bury the truth under the older, easier story of a woman who did not belong. Cormac did not let it land. "The evidence is a blade struck by a smith removed from the guild rolls 2 centuries ago, for forging curse weapons, matching the clasp found half a mile from the massacre site, matching in every particular the ceremonial dagger you've carried at this council for 3 years, and called a family heirloom." He set Finton's written confession on the stone floor at the hall's center. "The evidence is your own steward's signed account of 3 payments to that smith, the last one 9 days before my guard was slaughtered, and my children scattered too young to survive alone. Except they did survive, because the woman you just called a stranger fed them with her own hands, while you sat in this hall, wearing my absence, like a crown you thought was finally yours." Etain stepped forward then, not because Cormac asked her to, but because she had decided, somewhere on the walk back to this hall, that she was done letting other people's contempt decide how small she made herself. She set Sav, awake and alert, dark eyes fixed unblinking on Murkertach, down on the stone, directly at the regent's feet. She dropped the clasp at mine, the same way she used to drop dead voles at the cabin door, proud of finding something interesting. She didn't know what it meant. I did, and I'd rather trust the instincts of a pup too young to lie than the smooth words of a man who's had 2 months to rehearse this exact denial. The hall's mood broke fully against Murkertach, and he, watching 30 years of maneuvering collapse in under a quarter hour, called for the only weapon still legally his. "Open challenge cuts both ways," he said, voice gone raw and fast. "I invoke the ancient right of trial by combat, here, in the arena, before the full pack, and if I stand—" His eyes found Etain with a flash of pure calculation. "Every word spoken today, by an unranked outsider, is struck from record." "Then I'll fight you myself," Cormac said, before the echo had finished dying against the stone. "You're barely 2 weeks healed from a curse wound," Murkertach said, confidence creeping back into his voice. "You won't survive a formal duel, and you know it." Into the silence, before Cormac could answer, Etain spoke instead. "Then I'll stand for him." The uproar took nearly 2 minutes to quiet, and Cormac turned to look at her with the particular helpless fury of a man realizing the woman he loves is about to walk into exactly the danger he most wants to keep her from, with no lawful right to stop her. "Pack law permits a champion," one of the eldest elders finally said, silencing the hall with 2 centuries' authority in her voice. "If the sovereign grants it, and if the champion is known to this court, to bear skill worthy of the honor. Does your champion bear such skill, my king?" Cormac looked at Etain, the woman who had killed 2 scouts without a sound, broken a frightened steward's confession with nothing but a level voice, raised 5 heirs to a kingdom on goat's milk and stubbornness, while an entire court assumed them lost, and something in his face resolved into the full measure of reverence that had been building since the night she wiped her knife clean without a tremor. "Yes," Cormac said, "she bears skill worthy of any honor this hall has to offer, and worthy of more than this hall has ever thought to give a woman like her. Let the record show that I name Etain Brennack champion of Dubrath before this full council, by my own sworn word." The arena was carved into a natural stone bowl at the heart of the pack's territory, and by sunrise the next morning, Every soul in Dubroth capable of walking had crowded onto those tiers to watch a regent fight for his crown against a woman most had heard of for the first time the day before. Murchertach entered first, shifted fully into wolf form, a heavy gray-black beast, built with the density of a man who had trained 30 years for exactly this confrontation and never once expected to need it against anyone but a rival lord. Etain entered on 2 feet, 3 throwing knives at her belt and a short blade in her hand, and the murmur running through the crowd at the sight of a human woman facing a fully shifted wolf-kind lord carried an undercurrent she had stopped, somewhere in the last 2 months, letting shape how she moved through a room. Murchertach struck first, fast and low, testing, and Etain read the angle of his shoulder half a second before the strike landed, already gone from the space he'd aimed for, her blade opening a shallow line along his flank as she passed. He circled, faster now, less certain, and struck again. A committed lunge meant to end the fight in one motion, and Etain, trained by a man who believed a fight was won in the half-second before it started, did not dodge this one so much as invite it, letting him commit fully, before pivoting into the space beside his jaw and driving her short blade, angled exactly the way Cadwallader had drilled into her 10,000 times, into the gap between his foreleg and his ribs. Murchertach's roar of pain shifted, mid-sound, back into a man's scream, the forced reversion of a wound, driven deep enough to break a shift by shock alone, and he hit the arena stone in human form, bleeding, disarmed of the size and speed that had been his only real advantage. "Yield," Etain said, blade still leveled, voice flat and clear across the silent bowl of stone. "Or I finish what your own steward's confession already started." Murchertach, staring up at a woman he'd spent the whole trial dismissing as an outsider with no standing, made his last calculation and found it came up empty. "I yield," he said, scraped raw, and the roar that went up from the pack was not for his fall. It was for Etain, standing over him, breathing hard but unbowed, the first outsider, in 3 centuries of Dubroth's history, to stand as champion and win. That was Loop C's final resolution, and with it, at last, every thread the story had been carrying since the first cold night in the mud closed at once, the massacre explained, the traitor exposed, the champion proven, the throne restored to the line it had always belonged to. Cormac crossed the arena floor before the crowd's roar had even begun to fade, both hands framing her face with a gentleness that stood in stark contrast to the violence she'd just walked through on his behalf. "I told you anyone who made you feel like you didn't belong would answer to me," he said, low, only for her. "I didn't expect you to make that promise obsolete before I got the chance to keep it myself." "You said you wouldn't be gentle about it," Etain said, and something in her voice, an unfamiliar looseness, the sound of a woman setting down a weight she'd carried since she was 7, made Cormac's eyes flare gold-bright in front of the entire pack. "I meant it," he said, turning to face the crowded bowl of stone, his voice pitched to carry to the last row. "Let this hall witness, Etain Brennock, once dismissed as a stranger with no standing, is named Champion of Dubroth by combat won, guardian of the sovereign line by 2 months of care no one asked her to give, and, if she will have me, with no title left to hide behind, she is the woman I intend to stand beside as my mate, for as long as this pack has a king to answer to." Saab, still small enough to be carried, chose exactly that moment to squirm free of the elder holding her and streak across the arena floor to plant herself at Etain's feet, tail a blur, and the sound the crowd made at that, half laughter, half something closer to reverence, was, Etain thought, the first sound in her entire life that had ever made her feel like she was standing exactly where she was always meant to be. Murchertach was stripped of every title within the hour, his exile formalized before the council could adjourn, the outlawed Smith's operation tracked and dismantled within the week on evidence Finton, granted mercy for full cooperation, provided down to the last hidden ledger. The 5 pups grew into heirs the pack spoke of, with the fierce pride reserved for children who survived something the whole territory had heard about, and Etain, champion, guardian, and eventually mate to the Alpha King of Dubroth in a ceremony the whole pack turned out for, never once, let the title soften the edge Cadwallader had spent her childhood sharpening. She trained war captains twice her age. She sat in council and said exactly what she thought, and on the nights Cormac asked her, half joking, whether she regretted the quiet, solitary life she'd built before 5 wolf pups and a cursed king upended it, she told him the truth. "I built that cabin because I thought unwitnessed was the safest way to live," she said. "I didn't know yet that it was just the loneliest." What would you have done, faced with 5 starving pups and no idea what they'd grow into? Walked away to keep your solitude safe, or carried them home anyway and let the consequences find you? Tell me in the comments, because next time, we're going back to the very beginning of Dubrath's bloodline, to the war that first split this pack in two, and trust me, you are not ready for how that story ends.